This is Moshe coming to you from Israel, Wednesday, December 16th, welcoming you to another day in the beginning of sorrows. Yesterday the LA School District closed the doors and 640,000 people didn't go to school based on a scare. New York City had the same or a similar scare and didn't go for it. So they were doing this with the planes. That seemed to have dropped off where they were phoning in bomb threats and having planes turn around and go back. And they figured out the MO, the pattern, what to look for, and now you don't hear that much about the planes being turned back. So now they're going to work on schools, and then from there they'll do hospitals, and they'll do ball stadiums, everything. If you're going to do a terrorist event, what's the point of warning everybody? It shows you that they're spooked, the government, but that doesn't mean it's real. They could get spooked. The aircraft carrier, Harry Truman, on December 14th, 2 days ago, transited through the Suez Canal and entered into the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet area of operations. It's supposedly going to be joining France's aircraft carrier, and they're certainly not going to tell us where they're going to keep these, I expect they're going to be near Syria, my opinion. And there's two flotillas with it. I mean, it's a massive amount of warships collecting. You can call that war drums. We had a car ramming, and they hit 3 IDF soldiers who responded with firing, and they killed the terrorist, and the soldiers were wounded by friendly fire. That's not good. It's a deficiency in training. It really is. That's no excuse for that. How often do you hear the police in the United States shooting each other? It's like, once every few years. It's very, very rare. Egyptian planes have been allowed to cross over into Israel airspace to fight ISIS. Now, we didn't react to it. This is the first time this happened since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. I don't know if it was a mistake or they announced it and Israel knew about it. I don't have any idea. There was no incident other than that. They might have called and talked to each other on the phone after. I don't know. To illustrate the wonderfulness of Islam, a 39-year-old Philistine guy just picked up a hammer and attacked his manager and a colleague on a building site Tuesday, wounding one seriously and the other moderately. There you go. They just snap. I want my virgins. I want to be a martyr, and they start, killing people. It's so stupid. That's what they do. That's what they do. You could have a guy work for you for 18 years, and one day you turn your back, and he's with Islam, and he just picks up a lead pipe or something and just cracks you in the head. That's how they are. It's a death cult. That's all it is. So the fact that they're wounding each other means they need more training. Hopefully the IDF will respond to that over time, but it's going to be it's not going to be that quick to get the response for that. No. They have been training them to fade away or drop back in an angle when somebody comes at them with a knife, and that's been working because there's fewer Border Patrol and police and IDF that are getting injured. Well, mostly the police and the border police are the ones getting this training, and they're also taken to stopping people before they cross the checkpoint at about 25 feet away and have them pull their shirts up, pull their pants legs up, and get a pretty decent idea. They don't have anything on their person. Now, that's not foolproof, but it helps, because if they did have it someplace else, it would probably take time to get it out, although I know places they could do it. I'm not going to talk about it. They also carry backpacks, and they just make sure they don't put their hands in the backpack, so that works. And their injury rate from stabbings diminished tremendously. You need 21 feet. With a rifle loaded and cocked, maybe 12 feet, 15 feet. Okay. What else do we got going on here in Israel? That's nothing yet today. I don't see anything going on in Israel that's really different or significant. Netanyahu keeps telling the people he wants to get a handle on the terrorism. The people in Israel are brainwashed from the media, and I think from a large extent from the rabbis and from being in the military. You can't win this thing without aggressive action and routing them out. I mean, when you're dealing with people that teach 2-year-olds to cut the head off the baby, mimicking cutting the head off a Jew, off of a stuffed animal, I mean, come on. You can't work with this. No, this is a death cult, and he's using it for his purposes to stop prophecy. And the whole governments, plural, in Israel have been doing things like this for many years. The only time they ever get serious is if the Arabs launch a really major attack, like in 48 or something like that, where they're coming with tanks and bombs and artillery, and these guys are going to get killed and lose their country. Well, then they seem to fight for real. But those days are long gone. People learned their lesson that when they do that, Israel comes out ahead. See, God's not doing it because Israel is so righteous. God's doing it for his namesake, and he's showing the heathen that he will have his way. And they'll never understand. They're not going to wake up. They're going to die, and they'll wind up at the judgment. They may understand a few things at the judgment, but they're really going to be dumbed down for eternity, I think. I don't think they're going to be in the lake of fire and attending classes and Satan's going to teach them prophecy as a look back or anything like that. No, they're going to be too busy being miserable. That's the life they want for us. They want to send us into the lake of fire, so they wind up going to the lake of fire. Prophetically, there could be something going on here with this. This is the superbugs with the antibiotic resistance. First thing we got to understand is what is this superbug and stuff like that. The real problem comes from American and European hospitals that allow dirty surgeries in their operating rooms, and then the next patient comes in and the spores of bacteria are in the air ducts and all over the place in the operating room. I'll explain. Somebody comes in that's a homeless person and has all these body sores that are festering and infected for weeks, and they got to surgically clean the sores out, or bed sores, that have been festering. And, you know, these are dirty surgeries, okay? Now, a doctor will tell you this, but they're not going to tell it to you, you know, unless you're a friend or something like that. So they do these dirty surgeries, and then somebody comes in. Oh, another dirty surgery is somebody gets stabbed a shot in the intestines, and all uh, the fecal matter and other, you know, partially digested foods and whatever start coming out in the operating room. These places don't have open windows. They have closed ventilation, so the spores of bacteria root in the ducts and in the room, on the ceiling, and so forth. The Japanese operating rooms have this insulated, padded aluminum foil inserts. So before they do an operation, they probably clean the room with a disinfectant, the walls, the ceiling, everything. Then they put one of these inserts in the operating room, okay? And this insert covers the ceilings and everything. It's not going to cover the ventilation ducts, okay? And then they change their gowns and they put shoe covers on and this and that. And then they go in the room and they don't introduce bacteria. And it wouldn't be that much of a problem if dirty operations happen. Now, the spores could still be in the ventilation duct, but when you're in a regular, like American hospital, they're in the corners, on the floor, they're in the crevices of the cabinets, they're on the ceiling. They don't clean these things in between surgeries. They'll clean the countertops sometimes. They'll clean the handles for the light, the operating room light, and they'll put a disinfectant on the floor. So they get these staph infections, staphylococcus, and staphylococcus, different strains of bacteria growing in the hospital. And people have surgery, and a lot of people are elderly. And then they get an infection from the surgery. The doctors tell them nothing or tell them anything, right? And then what they do after that is they start giving them antibiotics. Well, they start, you know, usually put it in the IV. And if the guy's infection clears, it clears. If it doesn't clear, then they up the dose of the antibiotic in the IV. Give them a day or two of that and see if it clears. And then if it doesn't clear, they have some very sophisticated antibiotics that the medical community really restricts to hospital use. Now, if you're a doctor, you could get your hands on these things. And if you were in Beverly Hills and had a doctor that was interested in helping you and you were getting sore throats and he wanted to make sure you got better, there'd be nothing illegal about him giving you these so-called antibiotics. But then they start giving these guys these super antibiotics, and they try to conquer the infection. And if they prevail, then the patient eventually is going to heal up and go home. Not so simple. When they load the person up with heavy doses of antibiotics, it's very dangerous. One is they can go into anaphylactic shock. But they got him monitored in the hospital, and they just do a crash cart if he goes into shock. So they're not terribly worried about that. It's not them, it's you. And then people get side effects from this. They get goofy. They get dementia, stuff like that. The other problem is the anesthesia medicines. They are bringing on dementia, Alzheimer's, senility. If you know people that have this type of a condition, and you think back, you'll realize maybe 2 or 3 years before they started getting symptomatic with this dementia, senility, Alzheimer's. Look around and you'll find out they had some kind of a surgery. I've had doctors tell me that this is true. These anesthesia drugs, dumb the people down, and they become, short-term memory loss, disoriented, and things of this nature. Now they have surgical drugs that they use for, like twilight anesthesia, where they put the person down lightly. Like that would be for, maybe you had a burn and they had to dress it, or they're taking a mole off, or you having plastic surgery, minor plastic surgery, something like that. I don't think those have the same type of impact as the deep anesthesia. The deep anesthesia basically paralyzes you. And then if they really put you deep, they actually will breathe. They'll put the machine to breathe for you. And, the anesthesiologist is running your blood chemistry, running your heart, and all this kind of stuff. And people stop breathing during anesthesia. They're used to that. They convulse, all kinds of stuff. You should never have surgery unless you really, really need it. It's a dangerous sport. And now with the super bacteria, it's really dangerous. It's one of the reasons a lot of surgeons would rather have the surgeries done in their office operating suite, like a plastic surgeon, dermatologist, orthopedic surgeons, because these operating suites they control and they don't allow dirty surgeries to go on in there. They just don't do it. There's no reason for it. They don't want it in there. So they have an extremely low or even non-existent infection rate during the surgery. So their patients don't get these infections, or if they do, it's extremely mild, and they usually give them a mild antibiotic for a few days after surgery, like a Keflex or something, and it prevents the infection from taking root. They do very well with this, but it's these hospitals. The hospitals are dealing with junkies, they're dealing with prostitutes, they're dealing with people that unfortunately are living on the street, they're dealing with accident victims, all walks of life. And the average person doesn't have any idea that there's a difference between a dirty surgery and a regular surgery. They don't know that. I mean, a guy has a hand infection and he waits, and by the time he goes into the hospital, his hand's 2 or 3 times the size. There's pus and all kinds of stuff in there, and he took antibiotics. It didn't work, so they're going to go in and, clean the wound. Well, you're getting all this junk in the operating room. So these bacteria in the hospitals have been mutating, and they become resistant to the drugs the hospitals use. So the way they would normally deal with this is they would go back and develop a new line of antibiotics that they could sell to the hospital for, $60, $70 a pill or a dose or something like that. And the hospital would be able to treat it. But the drug companies, it costs them, $100, $300 million to make these things. And they're not going to make them and get a 2-year run out of it, and then it too is resistant, and you got to make another one. So they won't do it. This is work they'd rather leave for somebody else. It's all money driven. So they could have painted themselves into a corner with this. And they're getting quite worried right now. The stuff is spreading to animals, but it may not be spreading to animals. It may be coming from animals. When they raise animals, and you're not eating organic animals, you're eating regular supermarket animals, the animals are routinely given steroids, and you see women start menstruating when they're girls at 8, 9, 10 years old now. That's from that. Boys grow breast tissue. That's from that. And these animals are full of an assortment of antibiotics. Because if the animal's sick, yeah, you can have an epidemic, animals can die, you can lose the meat, they lose weight, it screws up the production. It's easier to just give them antibiotics, so they put it in the food. And of course it makes the animal feel bad, but the animal doesn't know too much and they don't care. They're cruel to animals. So you eat these animals that have been exposed to all kinds of antibiotics, and you can start seeing how the antibiotic resistance comes about. Now, people will tell you that the antibiotic resistance is a function of you taking a lot of these antibiotics, and that's not the case. The bacteria themselves mutate and learn to defend themselves from these drugs. The way they defend themselves is they detect the drug in the bloodstream and they avoid it. They're not as stupid as people think they are. Now, the government has done a fantastic job of suppressing alternative health care. If you want examples of this, look up the name of a guy named Royal, like Royal Flush, Royal Rife, R-I-F-E. He created a frequency machine in around 1920s that was routinely curing cancer, tuberculosis, all kinds of dread diseases. And it worked in conjunction with a dark field microscope, which they really don't want to see out there. And he had a great deal of success with it, and they made sure he died a pauper. Sounds like Tesla, doesn't it? Tesla worked on some other machines. He did the Minkowski multi-wave oscillator. Multi-wave oscillator, look that up. Multi-wave oscillator. And it was used up until the 60s to treat breast cancer, in particular in France, which is a civilized modern country. Well, this they suppressed. Who's they? The American Medical Association. Going back even further, we find that there used to be chiropractic hospitals in the United States, I believe in the 1800s. People would go to a chiropractic hospital where they weren't given medicines, but there weren't that many medicines out there back then. And they were put in a bed, and they had nurses, and they adjusted them several times a day, chiropractic adjustments. And I suppose they monitored fluids and gave them balanced meals and things of this nature. And they had a pretty good recovery rate with that. Okay? And then the AMA. The AMA came out there to knock those guys out, and they came up with the doctor of osteopathy, which they basically took the chiropractor and they brought him into their system of medicine, and they trained him on, you know, their medicine and their surgeries and stuff like that, and they were able to continue with their adjustments. So you had the DO, the doctor of osteopathy, the osteopath, would do the adjustments and had the chiropractic table, and yet he also could go on and become a general surgeon or a neurosurgeon or an OBGYN, and he could still do the adjustments and do all the other stuff. That's how they dealt with that. And it generally fell out of favor, you know. There are some of those guys running around. There's a few schools for it, but they're basically substandard medical schools. That's all they are. The lower level, the guys that can't get into the regular mainline medical schools go into that. Then there's homeopathy, which goes back to the 1700s, and they had homeopathic hospitals too. And when they had the Black Plague in Europe, the homeopaths were able to cure either it was 60% or 40%, because, one 60, 40, 40, 60. I can't remember which. I think it was 40. I think it was the lower figure. They got a pretty good cure on, that was the Black Plague. And, a lot of the cure is going to depend on the vitality of the patient when they come to the doctor, how far progressed it is, what kind of, energy they have, and all this kind of stuff. And they worked pretty good on that, which was a very, very difficult thing to work with. See, prior to World War II, at the end, the American medical doctors didn't have much. Okay? People would go to them with tumors and growths, and they would send it to a surgeon, and they would cut it out and try to keep them that way. They fixed broken bones. They did appendectomies, tonsillectomies. They were reasonably limited in what they can do. They didn't have any of their drugs. They didn't have their nuclear medicine. They didn't have much in diagnostics. They had x-rays and different types of x-rays. And, that's what they were doing. So people would get sick, and the doctor would tell you they have no real cure for it. They gave you fever powder, which would make you more comfortable, and then hopefully your body would recover. Then people would get strep throat, and before the antibiotics, and they would they'd have to wait till this pus pimple broke. They had a way of painting the pus pimple with silver nitrate on a long Q-tip, and that would sometimes kill the infection locally, and it would clear. But people would maybe be in bed with a strep throat for 2-3 weeks, and sometimes they'd be in bad shape. So a lot of people wouldn't go to the doctor when they got a flu or cold and a sore throat and all this kind of stuff. They wouldn't bother. The doctors didn't have much to offer you. Then after World War II, all of a sudden the kid would get sick. Well, let's fast forward into the early 50s, 53, 54, 55. The doctor would come to the house with erythromycin or penicillin, put it in a syringe, examine the kid, diagnose the kid, take the kid's temperature, look at the sore throat, look in the ears, and then say, okay, we got an infection, and he'd be correct, and then he would fill a reusable syringe with some antibiotic out of a bottle and ram it in the kid's butt. The kid would scream bloody murder, and probably in 24 hours the kid would be very much better, and in 48 hours the kid would be maybe 80-90% on the mend. It worked well because there was no resistance. The diseases weren't resistant to the antibiotics. And as time went on, the antibiotics stopped working, and they would make new antibiotics. But back then, it wasn't costing the drug companies $100 million to make a new antibiotic, because the Food and Drug Administration wasn't having them all shackled up like that. So you had, I can't remember, you had penicillin, you had penicillin 4, penicillin A, Z, Q, different versions of penicillin. And then they were putting other ingredients in with the penicillin, and then they had the multiple penicillins, and then they had the erythromycin, and then they had ampicillin. It went down, and they had different drugs. Then they got out of the injection stage. I think the drug companies realized that it was too fast and too easy, and they couldn't sell enough of the secondary infection kind of over-the-counter stuff like cough syrups, antihistamines, Tylenol, upset stomach stuff, cough drops. So they went to the pills. Instead of getting one injection and getting remarkably better in 24 hours, you would have to take 2, 3, 4 pills for 4 days or so till you started feeling better. And about 5, 6 days, you were in pretty good shape. And then to make more money, the doctors would tell you to take it for 10 days. I've lived in other countries where you don't have to get a prescription to buy these drugs, and instead of taking 3 or 4 antibiotics the first day, the people take 6 or 8. They do. I've tried it. I never went to 8. I did 6, or maybe even 7 once, and man, you get better fast. So the doctors are underdosing. See, when you get an injection, the antibiotic goes in your bloodstream for, roughly 18 hours. Could be 20, 22, could be 16. And it saturates your bloodstream heavily, and the disease gets killed. That's it. When you take the pill for 4 hours, the first hour and a half, the medicine spikes high in the bloodstream, then it tapers off. Then you take the next pill and your next pill. So it's not the same thing. It's a gradual process to kill it. You suffer more with the symptoms. The cough from the nasal drip could root deeper in, and all these problems. I don't know why they ever went to some system as stupid as this, because they had a good system with the injections. And in countries, if you want, I've done this. I've gone into the store and bought Rocephin, which is a strong antibiotic. And I know how to do injections. I just twist around, stab myself in the butt, inject the thing. Oh, it burns like all get up. And it would be highly effective. I mean, it's, it was, when you mix it with lidocaine. It has a numbing effect because it really hurts. But you could use Simplex, you could use penicillins and stuff like that, and it worked quite well. They just have been playing games with the people all along. If the doctor, or you go to the doctor and you're sick and he gives you the injection, and most of your symptoms are gone the next day, well, you're not going to get all these side effects. You're not going to have the need to keep taking antihistamines and cough syrup. And the drug companies make a fortune with these other things. So they drag it out and they keep you sicker. These are really evil people. They've suppressed the alternative health care. They've suppressed herbs. They've suppressed homeopathy. They've suppressed acupuncture and chiropractic. And there's another one called Ayurvedic, which is based from India, which is supposedly highly effective. I have very little contact with that. So this is what they've done. So they got the people into an antibiotic mentality. It started in the 50s, and everybody was raving about the doctors because, little Johnny gets sick, doc comes to the house, zaps him in the butt. You hold Johnny's hand, he calms down in 2 minutes, 5 minutes. He lays in bed, he sleeps, he sweats, and this and that. The next day he wakes up and he's like a new kid. You keep him in bed that day, and then he wants to go out and play baseball. Well, on rare occasions, if the kid didn't get better the next day, the doctor would come back and give him a second injection. But that was maybe 20% of the time. And the kids would get better. And then every year or two, they had a different antibiotic. And that went on through the 60s and into the 70s. And these antibiotics were still working very well. I remember they had tetracycline, I think it was called. And they were giving that out for the sore throats and the colds for, I don't know, many years. Many years they were doing that. 10, 15 years. And then it wasn't working on 20% of the cases, so they came up with new ones, and they just started evolving different medicines. And then in the 80s, they started having trouble with these things. Okay, it wasn't working right. You would take them, and after 3 or 4 days, you weren't getting better. You had to go back, and then they switched it for another antibiotic, and then sometimes you would get better that way. That started in the mid-80s. It wasn't working too good. Then they came out with new ones and this and that, and they're not that highly effective. When I started studying homeopathy, it was a result of getting sick a few times and having a terrible, terrible bout getting rid of it. I had bronchitis and close to pneumonia, and I was, low fever, and I was taking antibiotics all day long. I was working for myself out of the house, so I could, I could doze off. The antibiotics were making me sleepy, or I could make coffee, or take a shower, or whatever I needed to do. But it went on, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, and then I was coughing 6 or 8 weeks after that. My lungs were never the same until I found out about ozone many years later. I was out of the U.S., and I administered a large amount of ozone doses to myself with an insufflation, maybe like 100 times. And then my lungs, I cleared a lot of the crap out of my body from my parents feeding me, Skippy peanut butter and garbage food. I think it took about 100 doses of insufflation of ozone, medical grade. And then I cleaned, 50 years of junk out. And it used to be before I did that, every time I had a cold and I had a little nasal drip, I'd get a cough. And man, it would take me weeks to get rid of the cough. And then the ozone took care of that. So they bought it now. Now, let's talk about where this may be going. This could go to plagues, which is their fear, that it'll go to plagues. Now, in the middle of all this, they're never going to come around and tell you you're going to have to get cured with alternative health care. There's been a scandal. They've been killing alternative health care people, doctors that were fixing cancer. These people were getting killed, 11 or 12 of them. There's different ways, I'm sure, they could cure these so-called superbacteria, okay? You could use combination methods. You could use ozone with homeopathy or ozone with herbs. Chiropractic is only going to help. It may not necessarily do it, but it's going to help. So there's, you could throw a combination of these things in, but they're not really about to go out and tell you this. They're not going to do that. Because they got $1 trillion empire they don't want to lose. But it looks like it's being wrestled away from them. If this goes, and a lot of people are dying from this already, if it goes ballistic, people are just going to they're going to hear about alternative health care, and they're going to go to alternative healthcare practitioners, and they'll, unfortunately today, a lot of them are poorly trained. With acupuncture, I've never really come across a very effective acupuncturist. I've found some that can, make you feel better, maybe treat a headache or a sore arm or leg, this type of thing, but I've heard of acupuncturists, you go to them with an upper respiratory infection and you walk out of there, your sinuses are dried up. I've never experienced it, but I heard people tell me about it, and I don't believe that people would be lying. But I've gone to several of these acupuncturists without any real results. No. Homeopaths are by and large, poorly trained. It could work if the person is correctly trained, but the training is very bad, as is the acupuncture. Yeah, so that brings you to Ayurvedic, which is based in India. And the chiropractors are good, but I wouldn't want to fight super bacteria with chiropractic. Now, when they did the chiropractic hospital, I think they were giving the people adjustments anywhere from 4 to 10 times a day. So I had a chiropractor that I became friends with that taught me how to do adjustments many years ago in Israel when there was no licensing of chiropractors. There still isn't. So it wasn't illegal for him to teach me, so he taught me because there was no license. So he wasn't, assisting the practice of chiropractic with an unlicensed person. There's no license. There's no license for homeopathy here. I don't believe there's a license for herbology either, because homeopathy is herbology. So that's what is going on. So it may get to the point where the only way these people are going to get better is, give you a one-word hint, congregations. Call for the elders, confess their sins, anoint them with oil, they get healed. That might be the only recourse here. Don't know. I don't know. It could be just another sign of the government collapsing. I'm not sure, guys, but it certainly looks that way, and it's not something that just popped up. This has been going on and scaring them for 4 or 5 years at least. And the people don't understand what it is. They think that they got to take less antibiotics. They don't get it. Won't get it. Okay, so the doctors are not going to, if the doctors stop giving the people antibiotics, people aren't going to go to the doctors. I personally believe that you should not need prescriptions to get drugs, any drugs. I think it's an idiot system. It's corrupt, and you don't need it. I've lived in places where you could go in and tell the drugstore guy what's wrong, and they give you the drug. What do I need to go call a guy up, make an appointment, give him a lot of money, sit in a waiting room with other sick people for hours for him to come in and, not really, know what's going on with me, just give me an antibiotic as first line of defense. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I got to come back in, sit in another room with sick people, wait hours, see him again, and then he gives me a second expensive antibiotic. And then if that doesn't work, then he starts paying attention to me and starts suggesting that I go to the hospital. And in the hospital, they can give me IV antibiotics. Well, I've had doctors that do IV antibiotics in the office, by the way. The fear is anaphylactic shock. So what they do is they have you come in, you lay down, and they run the IV, and they have you hang around for 15 or 20 minutes to make sure you're okay, and then you go home. And you don't have to go check yourself into the stupid hospital. Now, that's not an IV 24 hours, but that's a heck of a big dose, which should keep you going close to 24 hours. That's it. So I'm just watching this as another symptom, and we'll see. So you can imagine somebody gets a strep throat, and they go to their family doctor, and he gives them an antibiotic, and nothing happens. 3 days later, they're spiking 103 fever. They feel miserable. They can't do anything. They go back. He gives them a second antibiotic. Nothing. Then a third antibiotic. Now they're really run down. They're losing weight. They got the cold sweats. They're coughing their brains out. He's giving them codeine cough medicines, and their nose is running, all this stuff. And then he tells them to go to the hospital, and they run heavy doses of these antibiotics in them, which is going to give them side effects. And he may make it and he may not make it. He may die. He may die. And they've suppressed healthcare, alternative healthcare. They don't want anybody competing with their rotten system. The royal family of England uses ozone and they use homeopathy. There you go. You can draw from there. I'm sure a lot of the other rich and famous do the same thing. The antibiotics were nice when they used to work. Like I had a doctor tell me, this is about 15 years ago. He told me, well, you know, when you had, it was about 16 years ago. He says, so, you know, the old days, somebody had pneumonia. All you had to do was walk in the room and take the cap off the penicillin bottle, and they would get in the air in the room and they would get cured. Well, it's not entirely true, but they'd give them 1 or 2 injections of penicillin and the guy would get better. Now they have pneumonia and they have a horrible time getting people out of pneumonia because the antibiotics are not that good. And they load them up with the antibiotics and that brings people into senility and dementia and other problems. You know, it just... We had a relative go in for a surgery on a knee, an arthroscopic surgery, a little opening. He came out and it was great. And then he starts getting an infection. He goes back. They said, oh, you got an infection. So they start with the antibiotics. It's not working. So then he goes back in and they say, okay, we got to go back in and clean it up. So now they give him more anesthesia, and they go in and they clean it up, and he's back in the hospital with IV antibiotics, huge doses, and he's starting to get a little goofy. Okay, he's old. He goes home and he's kind of doing okay, and then the infection comes back again. So this surgeon guy is a real jackass, so he doesn't know what to do. So he says, you know, you've got gallstones, and I think the infection's hiding in the gallstones. So what I want to do is go in and take your gallbladder out. This is from a tiny, small incision surgery on the knee. Now he's taking the gallbladder out, taking the stones out, and trying to get rid of the infection. So the guy... I told the guy not to do it. The guy does it, and he takes his gallbladder out. And he goes in and he cleans the wound. They call it debride. He debrides the wound again. They give him the IV antibiotics. He's in the hospital a few days. Then they send him home. And they have a visiting nurse come to the house, give him IV antibiotics for some weeks. And he gets better. But then from all the anesthesia and the IV antibiotics, he loses his balance. He can't balance correctly. He loses his mind to some extent. He can't remember things. He makes mistakes. He had a couple of issues with bowel control, which seemed to have passed. You know, yeah, and that was, he went in to have a little procedure on the knee. And this became a major life episode that he's paying for. They're really dangerous these days. They really are. And they don't train the doctors about what to do about this. And, you know, so, okay, I got onto a diatribe here. Remember, it was Rockefeller, I think it was, took some advisors and sent them all over the world to study all the different healthcare systems. And then he got involved with the drug companies making the antibiotics using petroleum products. I think that's what the pills are made out of. If you go back, like in the 1800s and stuff like that, people, they didn't have much with antibiotics and stuff like that, so they went to alternative healthcare doctors. And when they had a cough, they would take opium or heroin pills to suppress the cough. They had pain, they do the same thing, where they would take cocaine or mix the two or alcohol. And that's how people functioned. They, they'd take the narcotic for the cough, and then when the weather warmed up, they would be out in the sun, and hopefully they would clear up. But a tremendous amount of people were smoking back then. They didn't have proper ventilation in their homes, and things like this. So then now it's coming around, and it looks like it's blowing up on them. And I don't know exactly what it's going to do. But I think we should be ready for this, because it could go with the healing. Now, I was doing Bible study yesterday. I was talking about the daughter of Babylon may be around for some more time than I was thinking. And this is true. But it doesn't have anything to do with Israel. Okay? It says in the daughter of Babylon, those of you that have survived the sword, let Zion come to mind. So it's going to have a lot of fighting in there. Ruler fighting ruler. And those of you that survived the sword. So it's going to be bad. It's not going to be a utopia. Okay? It's going to go down. Trump getting in, to me, makes some sense. Okay? He's one of them. He's just as bad as Bush or any of those guys. But he's talking a different talk, and he's saying he's going to do this, that, and the other thing. Well, what about the taxes? What is he going to do? I mean, he doesn't have, I don't think, a really great plan. What about all the billions of dollars the American people owe in taxes? How's he going to deal with that? So people start making money, and then the IRS just starts collecting it. They make it easy to cheat the IRS. Why? Because it puts you in a sin to them. And then they can get over on, the government can get over on the people a lot better and easier. You ever think of that? That's why they have the so-called honor system. The whole thing, the banking, does Trump talk about the banking and worthless money? No. No. He talks about making a military great again. Did you ever think he may intend to have a draft? The problem with the draft is you can't draft men without drafting women today in the United States. They got to draft both. So he's created a scenario where Obama has, where women are given full combat roles in the military. So that's opening the door to drafting women. Women have not yet been required to sign up, just men, but they may do it. When they draft, they usually draft up until age 34 or 35. I think if there was a time of war, I think they used to go up to 40. I can't remember, but I think they did. But I think when you're dealing with guys over 30, they put them through a different kind of program, They're not exactly going to take a 38-year-old guy and treat him like a 19-year-old guy. He's not going to make it. So they may start a draft, and that's how Trump will build up his military. In terms of getting Mexico to pay for the wall, I don't think those Latin Americans will ever do it. No. Trump will probably put the wall up. We read about the daughter of Babylon in the Bible, and Jeremiah 50:51 with the walls. So yeah, I think there'll be walls. That's what I think. And I think Trump's a good choice for walls. He knows how to build a wall. He will bring the jobs back, but read what he says. He says, I'm going to give you jobs. You see, what he's saying is you peons are going to work for those of us that serve the real gods of the universe. We're going to own the businesses. We're going to manage them and administrate them, and you're going to be laborers for us. But look at it this way. It's easier, it's better to be a laborer that has a job than to sit around in your house without a job fighting off the collection agencies. So you get up, you go to work in our factories, make us billionaires, and you'll have what to pay your bills. You'll be able to go to Disneyland. You'll be able to go to the movies, and we can brainwash you in these places. You'll keep your TV and your internet so we can keep brainwashing you. And you could die and go to the lake of fire. And there you have it. That's Trump's version of what he wants. But does he talk about the small business is what made America great, and we got to bring small businesses back again? No, the small business was the curse of the witches. They hated that. They hated it with a passion. Because somebody could open up a store in the neighborhood and he was nice and friendly to everybody. He sold milk and cheese and he worked hard and the people supported him. Or he opened up a vegetable business, or he opened up a pickle store, or whatever he did. And the people would support him. They'd rather have the Walmart model, or big department store, or big store, where there's, one or two rich fat cats that own the place that are going to make more money than they could ever spend, and everybody else is going to work for them as a laborer. They don't want you to have your own business. So you got to listen to what Trump said. What made America great was the businesses, the small businesses, the ethical small businesses. That's what made America great. Closing the businesses down in favor of the mass merchandiser was the mistake. Buying from China was a compounding of the mistake. So even Trump's economic policies are flawed. Why doesn't he talk about at least having a currency partially backed by gold and silver? Probably because the Fort Knox has no gold left. Some of those guys stole it already. As a guess, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. Trump doesn't talk like that. Trump admits the markets are rigged, but he doesn't talk about fixing them. He's not going to put his buddies out of business. Does Trump tell you there's 20 people in the United States that have as much wealth as 142 million people? No. He's not of the 20, but he's probably of the 200 richest people. And those 200 richest people may have as much wealth as 180 million people or 190 million people. So the distribution of the wealth in the United States is bizarre. It's stupid. Okay? Trump says he's going to fix Obamacare. With what? What's he going to do for it? How much is it going to cost? How do you do that? I don't know. Trump's going to have room to play if he cuts the imports down with protectionist tariffs, which you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand, and building up the military and using heavy-handed threats against the trading partners. He'll create the jobs, maybe, with bad wages, because he's got to keep the price of these goods down. I mean, you can't, let's say they're going to bring a set of socket wrenches in from China, and they're going to sell this set for $17. Well, if you're going to make it in the United States, your labor is going to cost you 15, 25 times more than the Chinese labor. So your socket wrenches are not going to be $22. They might be $49. So what are you going to do? Put a 300 or 400% tax on the Chinese goods? You can't do that. You could give them 25, 30% tax, something like that. That you can come up with. But it's not going to be enough. So a lot of what Trump talks about, I'm not understanding. I don't know what he's really and truly gonna change. Does he talk about the Patriot Act? No, he doesn't talk like that. He talks about the Second Amendment. See, the NRA told the people, we just draw the line at sporting arms. This was the mistake. The NRA is them. Okay? What the NRA should have done, and it didn't do, is it should have been back. Like I used to see in the early 60s ads in Guns and Ammo magazine. You can look for these ads where they were selling bazooka with rounds. $15 or something like that, the pipe, the bazooka. And they had rounds. People could buy those. They sold the 51 caliber Boys anti-tank rifle. The slogan was for the jackrabbit that got away. They were, $20, $30. That's a pretty potent gun. And they had mortars you could buy with mortar shells. The people were allowed to acquire weapons. Full auto. Most states had full auto. They were able to buy, German Schmeissers after the war. The grease gun from the United States. There was a lot of Tommy guns laying around. Full auto, different kinds of guns were floating around in the 50s and early 60s, the pre-Vietnam era, There was all kinds of weapons. So people were able to buy beyond sporting weapons. Okay, they were able to buy 30 caliber tripod mounted machine guns, water cooled, belt fed. And that's a serious weapon. That's a real serious weapon. That's called a squad machine gun. They were able to buy 50 calibers. They were able to buy anti-aircraft guns. These things were for sale, mail order. The country was afraid of the communists then. They wanted the people armed because it was a deterrent to invading the United States. Now they've pitted themselves against the people of the United States, and these weapons are a threat to them. But the NRA should have allowed people to have military-grade weapons. Now, where do you draw the line? What about a 155 millimeter artillery piece and some guy gets drunk and shoots a round off and hits a house and blows everybody up in the house? I see there's a point where you stop. Where do you stop? The people need heavier weapons to defend against the government. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? Do you start giving them howitzers that could go 25 miles? It's a hard question to answer. What about hand grenades? It's really rough. If the people have no access to these weapons and the government does, they're disadvantaged. Okay? So I don't have an answer for that. I think God's answer for that is the grid goes down and all these weapons stop working. That's his answer. Now, the United States that we read about in Jeremiah 50:51 has the so-called grid down. The motors aren't working, the guns and stuff aren't working. So how long ago did that happen? I don't know. But when we read about Ezekiel 38:39 and we read about Jeremiah 50:51, they're using Roman-era weapons, chariots, horses, bows, arrows. I don't think the transition from a modern depiction day like today with jets and locomotives and subways and cars and tanks and all this stuff to Roman-era weapons with no mechanization is going to happen in 60, 90 days. I think it'll be a few years. First, chaos, turmoil, death, plagues, pestilence, animal attacks, starvation, tremendous problems, okay? And these are not the times that the people are going to be able to transition over. Okay, what about all the people in the hospital when the power's out? What about the school system? What about all the computer entry money gone? Major problems, guys. All the apartment houses are going to be worthless. How do you run the plumbing and the water? And there's no heat. The farmhouse will be okay. The guy with the well might be okay. He might have to pump his well. He might have to drop a bucket in the well. There's different things he might have to do, but he's going to be okay. But the city dweller is not going to be okay. How's he going to get out of the city? Where's he going to go? They'll be killing each other to get the food supply. It's in the scriptures. I don't see it not happening. There's no mechanized weapon. There's no flying anything. There's no plane. There's no mechanized tanks or jeeps or, mobile artillery pieces. There's no nothing. There's no cannons. It's all gone. No guns, nothing. So after the people recover from the initial impact of this and they adapt, a lot of the population is going to be gone. I'd say a fourth at least. And those that are left, maybe it'll be a third. I don't know. You read about it in Revelation. And those that are left, what do? Well, they got to start trying to figure out how to they need things like buckboards, right? Wagons, saddles, horses. You got to start breeding horses. You got to start breeding cows. You got to start breeding chickens and roosters and all kinds of animals for food. You've got to start plowing the land. You got to manually plow the land. You don't have these international harvester machines that are going to do it for you. And you're not going to have irrigation for the land. You're going to have God send the water. This isn't 30 or 90 days. This is 2 years would be very, very minimal on this. I'd say 4 or 5 years till they begin to get stabilized. Then from there, they'll start raising armies and making new governments and regional and local governments and start oppressing the people again. And then Israel's going to be off doing its own thing, in my opinion. But I don't have all the details on that. But it's going to be a very, very, very bad time. Not for just the United States, for all these countries. I think the only one that may be escaping this is Israel. God's going to destroy all these nations because of what they did to Israel. And he's going to kill all their armies. So then they're going to have to regroup and rebuild a new army. How do you build, after the shambles of no modern devices, how are you going to build a new army? It's going to take years. You need uniforms. You need weapons. You need barracks. You need training. Your communications is gone. Your transportation is gone. I mean, are you going to make boats and power them with wood-burning devices that boil water and create steam? And but yeah, you probably could, but then you need to have the machines to manufacture these devices. And then how can you use a big heavy metal boat that leaks like a sieve? A lot of problems. There's going to be a lot of problems. They've got to learn how to make sailboats out of wood. Maybe they can have rowing as well. They got to grow stuff manually again and rely on the Lord for the rain. And then if the two witnesses decide they don't want this country to have rain, then what? Then they don't have food. Then they don't have food. So it's end times is very, very perplexing. And when you look at churchianity end times, I don't hear any of them talk about the grid going down. But it's obvious, but they won't talk about it. Because they don't want the believers to believe it, because they think if the believers believe it, it's going to happen. So they want you to not understand this there, but it's right in your face. It's inescapable. But the transition period will be years from sheer chaos. I mean, look, you're in a city. Okay? And after a few days, when people figure out they're in a bad way, they're not going to go take their compound bow and their arrows out of the closet and get on the horse and ride into the woods and try to shoot an elk and drag it back home after they dressed it. That's not happening. What horse? What bow? So what they're going to start doing is robbing the leftover food supply from whoever they can find. And they'll form gangs. They'll use sticks, hammers, axes like the Arabs. Anything. And they'll form groups of 15, 20, and they'll come around and attack houses. They'll attack people. So then people are going to have to form defensive units, and then you're going to have battles, and water is going to be in short supply. Disease is going to set in because there's going to be a lot of dead bodies laying around, and the animals will be eating the dead bodies, and the animals will get sick, and the animals will be attacking people, and all kinds of stuff's going to happen. It's going to be horrible. Now, I don't know when this is going to happen, but I think a heck of a lot sooner than later. Otherwise, these people are just going to try to destroy each other with their highly mechanized war games. I don't know. God may let them. God may let the United States have a couple of wars, but it still stays as the world power till the end. So it doesn't get knocked down that much, but it gets knocked down. But everybody else gets knocked down. So I don't have all the clarity in this, okay? But I know certain things happen, and the grid, as I call it, goes, and the weapons go. And the medical system, of course, is gone, right? And the food production is going to be back to the Roman era, right? Transportation will be Roman era. I mean, you might have like a stagecoach type thing or something like that. You know, roads will be a problem because all the defunct cars and trucks will be on the roads, and I don't know how you're going to get them off the roads. So, what's easier, making a new road next to the old road, or trying to clear millions of defunct vehicles off of the road? Well, it's probably easier to make another road. And that's what you got. That's what you got. And it's all things work for the good of those that love God. What this is really doing is not increasing the load on God's people. It's more or less punishing those that are working against God. Now, we may be in the wilderness these days. We may be in the wilderness during these days. That's a very possible theory. Very possible. Remember, there's 2 trips to the wilderness in Revelation 12. Or it's described twice. It could be the same or different. Probably different. If it was the same one, why would God refer to it as time at times, a half a time, and 1260 days another time, and 42 months another time? It's not the same exact time period, that's why. All right, we got a few prayer requests today. Let's get them out. We want to pray for KJ, Kilo James, KJ. We want to pray for spiritual strength and more faith. Okay? Spiritual strength and more faith for KJ. These are hard times for people. I have trouble. I know you guys do too. Another prayer request is for, like, most of the clan. So I'll read the initials, okay? RH, SH, MH. Actually, it's better. Let's just do it this way. AW's family. AW's family. Apple, Washington. AW. Pray for salvation for the family, protection from the evil ones, deceiving them, and faith. We have a situation where one of these people, one of the parents, is believer, and the spouse and the kids are not. So AW's family, that they would be saved and protected from the deceptions of the evil ones, and also for peace and joy for AW, Apple, William. Okay, kids, please pray for me and Rivka, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for a good government for Israel. Pray that God reveals stuff to us about the scriptures. Kind of please pray that if there's something I'm missing that I shouldn't be doing or should be doing, that God would reveal it to me. I don't think so, but it has occurred to me. So please pray for that. So if I'm missing something or I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, have the Lord reveal it to me. Okay? Those of you that are my 1%ers, thank you for supporting this work. It helps. And those of you that would like to be supporting a good biblical work, I'll have the information in the description box, and this could be a beneficial thing for you, because if you give to a good work, God loves a cheerful giver, and then he pays you back. If you don't believe in supporting the people in the ministry, then I can't help you there. You know, I have people that give like $5. You know, you just got to start someplace. You know. And if news happens during the day, I'll post it up. We have some information about Egypt and the Exodus that came to our attention, archaeological stuff. I'll try to deal with that and get that up too. That's it. Munch out.